My hands reacted without my brain even comprehending what they were doing, raising the gun high and pointing it at her chest. I saw the knife coming down as if in slow motion, then thick drops of blood splashing in the air as bullets ripped through her stomach and heart. She jerked backwards, the knife rising back up as her arm spasmed. Stumbling, she stepped forward, futilely slashing at the air 6 inches in front of Richie's neck with all of her strength before falling face first on the porch. Richie hadn't even reacted as the knife whizzed in the air towards his body. He stood, shell-shocked and dazed, like a victim from a war zone. So did I, except with a smoking gun in my hands. Screaming began to emanate all up and down the street as people started running out of their houses. For a couple seconds, I thought everyone had simply reacted to the sound of gunshots. Perhaps some of them had even seen me kill Melissa, though if they had, they would have known my actions were clearly taken in self-defense. She still clutched the knife tightly in her right hand, her eyes bulging from their sockets, the maniacal grin eternally etched across her thin, pretty face in a grisly death mask. I quickly realized the other people on the street were not coming out to investigate gunshots, but instead running for their lives. I saw men, women and children chased by family members wielding knives, axes and guns. Across the street from Richie's house, I saw a little girl, no older than 10, running in her bright yellow SpongeBob pajamas. The mother, an overweight woman with pendulous breasts and greasy, black hair, held a blood-stained samurai sword above her head, breathing heavily as she sprinted after her daughter with murder in her eyes. Under the harsh glare of the streetlights, she looked surreal, like a villain from a cartoon. Mommy, no! The girl shrieked, flailing her arms in front of her as she ran, as if she hoped an invisible guardian angel would grab her and carry her away. Daddy, help me! But I had a feeling her dad was not coming, based on the amount of blood already on the murder weapon. Richie and I began to run towards the girl, but the mother closed the distance quickly, her nightgown flying furiously around her waist, her eyes wild, a twisted grin marring her pale face. She raised the sword, bringing it down on the back of the girl's leg. With a squeal of agony, the girl fell forwards, her pajamas quickly turning crimson with the blood streaming down her leg. She began to crawl away, weeping and shrieking for her father. Behind her, the mother raised the sword again, intending to strike the killing blow. With the girl on the ground, I had a clear shot now. I had been tempted to try to take her out earlier, but the girl had stood right between me and her mother, and I feared that I would kill them both if I fired. Now I had the mother right in my sights, the lunatic gleam in her dark eyes making her seem somehow inhuman, even alien. I squeezed the trigger, watching her head explode in a shower of hair, skin and bone splinters as a short burst of 3 or 4 bullets exploded out the end of the barrel. Her headless body stood there for a few moments, holding the bloody sword high, the neurons still firing in a body that didn't realize it had lost its life yet. She staggered forwards, falling towards her daughter, the spurting stump of her neck soaking the girl in her mother's blood. The girl continued to crawl away from this nightmarish figure that had once been her mother. Running forwards, Richie grabbed the girl, carefully lifting her up behind her knees and shoulders. I covered them as mayhem broke out all down the street, continuously moving the barrel of the automatic rifle in the direction of any nearby sounds, ready to fire at a moment's notice. Most of the houses were spaced a few hundred feet apart, with thick forests that stretched behind them for miles. Further down the street, I saw chaos and bloodshed as deranged family members murdered their own sons and daughters, their own mothers and fathers, littering the street with the corpses. Pain-filled screams shattered the silence of the night, echoing and distorting as they mixed into a nightmarish cacophony. Even months later, I still hear them when I'm falling asleep, the horror-filled cries of children in their last moments. We ignored the bloodshed and ran back towards the house. The girl's blood dripped all down Richie's arms. She moaned and kept rolling her head, eventually letting it settle against Richie's chest. Then she went quiet, her eyes closing, a peaceful look coming over her face. We ran through the open door. Richie took the girl into the kitchen, putting her on the table. I stayed behind, locking the door before also engaging the deadbolt. I turned around, assessing the damage. The girl's eyes stayed close as Richie took off her pajama bottoms. We both had college degrees and a great deal of theoretical knowledge on many subjects. But neither of us had any real experience in assessing or dressing wounds. I took out my phone, instinctively going to YouTube to type in, how to give someone stitches, but I noticed my internet didn't work. All phone calls and text messages refused to go through. Apparently, they had taken down all cell service as well as revoking emergency services. Okay, I said, we have no internet. So we're going to have to do this blind. I don't think it's that difficult. I think you know more about this than I do, Richie said. You always loved anatomy and dissections and all that. I nodded grimly. I went and washed my hands while Richie grabbed a box of latex gloves from a kitchen drawer. I walked back to the girl and started to clean the area with paper towels, a bowl of water and a clean rag sitting next to the prone figure on the table. Soon, the water had turned a bright red as I used the rag to clean the blood off her skin. I could see the wound had not hit any vital areas. I saw no severed blood vessels spurting bright red arterial blood in time with her heartbeat, and the bleeding had already started to slow. I sighed in relief at our small bit of luck. It looks a lot worse than it is, I said. The sword cut into the muscle somewhat, but it missed all the major arteries and veins in the area. She might have a hard time walking, but I think that, as long as we clean and bandage it properly, she should be fine. Assuming she gets out of here alive, Richie pointed out. I nodded. He went and grabbed a sewing kit from his living room, something Melissa had left behind. From the garage, he got a length of fishing line. After sterilizing the needles and fishing line and cleaning the wound with alcohol, I threaded it and began to stitch the girl's skin back together. The girl still lay on the table, catatonic and pale. Richie and I sat in the living room, unsure of what to do next, waiting for her to wake up from her catatonic state. You know what I think? Richie asked. No, but I'm sure you're about to tell me, I said, glancing out the window. Richie's eyes gleamed, his hands shaking. I couldn't tell if it was terror or excitement. You know how the Bible sounds totally nuts, at least the Old Testament part, where they talk about how all women came from a man's rib and how there were only two people and everyone is descended from their children's incestuous coupling? I nodded. This was a topic Richie had gone on at length about before. I knew where he was going to try to steer the conversation. I sighed, looking out the window again. Other than the dozens of bloody bodies strewn across the street, everything looked idyllic, just another peaceful street in a small American town. Yeah, and you think it has something to do with aliens, right? I said. He nodded quickly, gesticulating crazily with his hands now. I mean, yeah. Think about it. A woman coming from a man's rib? That doesn't even make sense. Unless, he put his finger up, it was some sort of genetic engineering. Perhaps they wanted his bone marrow for its DNA. You don't need to take out someone's rib to get their DNA, I retorted. You can literally get DNA from any part of their body, except the red blood cells, of course. He looked at me quizzically. I forgot just how much you know off the top of your head sometimes, he said, shaking his head. Why not the red blood cells? Because they lose the nucleus when the progenitor cell creates them, so they have no DNA and no nucleus. I thought I saw a shadow flicker across the street. But when I turned my head, I saw just shadows. A flag waved lazily in the front yard. Well, anyways, they might have had a reason for using the bone marrow for genetic engineering. Why do you think Adam and Eve's great-grandkids weren't deformed mutants or babbling idiots? Richie asked. I don't know, you tell me, I answered. I'm assuming it's because the story is a load of bullshit. He smiled at this. Because the kids were genetically engineered, too, and probably the grandkids and so on. The aliens likely kept changing each individual's genetic code so these few people could reproduce with their own siblings without harmful effects to the children. They probably engineered all the different races, too. They made the two genders, so why not? Richie explained enthusiastically. I had to give him credit, the whole idea made sense in a weird kind of way, and another weird thing, Richie said, is that you could make a woman from a man, but not a man from a woman. To make a woman from a man's DNA, all you need to do is remove the Y chromosome and duplicate the X chromosome, right? But you can't make a man from a woman's DNA because the Y chromosome would be entirely missing. The Y chromosome would have to be synthetically engineered from nucleotides, which would pose a huge problem, much harder than just replicating the X chromosome. There's no way the people who wrote the Bible could have known any of that. I think what's going on now is just demonic, I replied. Aliens wouldn't come all the way here just to take a random monkey and engineer it into the human species. And they wouldn't care about replacing people. What kind of sense would that make? But in hindsight, even though both of us were wrong, I think Richie was much closer to the truth. The girl woke up about 15 minutes later. I heard her moaning from the living room, turning away from the window. Where I had kept a constant watch, I saw her rising on the table, her small face a mask of pain and confusion. Where am I? She asked. You're just across the street from your house, I said. We brought you inside. Strange white tentacles covered the area where its eyes should have been, writhing and undulating, thick with slime and blood. Underneath it, I could see the face splitting in two as its grin spread ever wider, separating except for 5 inches of bone and glistening muscles at the back. Hundreds of sharp, serrated teeth gleamed in the light. Its body looked skinned, wet with blood that dripped from its bony fingers. It closed its mouth, the flesh coming together without any line or mark indicating where it had separated, and, in a gurgling voice, it spoke, "The experiment is nearly complete. We will keep the strong alive. In the end, you will stand alone, and to us you will return. But do not be afraid. We will make the strong eternal." Why are you doing this? I screamed, my finger tightening on the trigger. I wanted to blow apart this monstrous apparition, but something inside told me to hold my fire. I had a feeling he had not come alone, and if I began shooting, it might force them to invade the house and attack me. You have 3 hours left until the experiment ends, it said, turning to leave. It ignored my question. I watched the muscles on its skinless body contracting as it walked away, the huge tentacles sprouting from its head constantly writhing like snakes. I saw the alien creature walk over to the woods on the other side of the street, where 2 more of its kind stood waiting. Both naked and skinned. A man in a black robe with the hood pulled over his face followed behind them as they disappeared into the shadows. I hadn't realized just how massive they were until a human form stood directly beside one. They towered over him, at least 8 feet tall, with their tentacles stretching out far behind them. I turned to see Richie and Alice, standing horror-struck in the kitchen. They were preparing some of the perishable food by flashlight, making ham sandwiches with cheese and lettuce, drinking milk and orange juice. I sat down, grabbing a sandwich and taking a bite. Well, Richie, I said through a mouthful of sandwich, I think you're right about them experimenting on us. I don't know why or what they hope to accomplish, but something intelligent is clearly using us as guinea pigs. Did you hear what it said? What's going to happen in 3 hours? Is that when they plan on killing all of us, the survivors? They already wiped out most of the town, she said bitterly. They killed my mom. They killed my family, too, I said. And I think we'll all be dead soon if we don't do something. We can't stay here. We have to get out of town. We have to warn people what's happening here. You said those government goons already know about it, Richie said. Who else are we going to warn? No one would believe us for a minute. I barely believe it. I felt like I had been slapped. I hadn't thought about the men in the black SUVs ever since we took Alice in. Where had they gone? Why weren't they here, tracking down people associated with the anomaly and shooting them, unless they had abandoned the town? Perhaps it had gone too far for such measures to be of any use. Perhaps that was why they had disabled 911 by the time I got to Richie's house. A shiver of fear ran through my body as I contemplated it. What about getting revenge, for Melissa and your wife? He pointed at me, and your mother. He pointed at Alice. I laughed at that. Revenge? With what? The 3 magazines I have left for this rifle? You guys don't even have weapons, and she's just a 10-year-old girl. I want revenge just as much as anyone, but we have to focus on surviving. Most of all, we had to focus on her surviving, I said, nodding towards Alice. We're the only people left now who can help her get out of here alive. Richie was about to say something when shrieking started outside. I heard a man yelling for his life. I ran to the window and saw someone banging on Alice's house across the street. Oh God, please help me, someone. He screamed. When no one answered, he began running towards Richie's house. I figured he had been doing this for a couple minutes. But when he saw the beam of the detachable flashlight on the gun through the front window, his eyes widened. Oh, thank God. He said, please let me in. They're right behind me. I looked at the man in wonder for a long moment, then recognition came to me. This was the agent I had ambushed in the woods. I could tell by the broken nose, the bloody mark on his forehead, the black suit he wore, and even by his cold eyes. Without thinking, I ran to the hallway and flung open the front door. Come in. I whispered. And stop fucking yelling. You're going to attract everything in a 10-mile radius with that. And then I saw what was behind him, coming up the dark street, and my words caught in my throat. A dozen agents in black suits walked forward, bone-white tentacles whipping crazily around their heads. Their eyes were gone, the entire top of their head replaced by those strange alien appendages. Below it, I saw their mouths gnashing, constantly biting the air with bloody serrated teeth. They were coming in our direction. Time to go. I yelled into the house at Richie and Alice. They had been preparing backpacks of food and water. In a flash, they were out of the house, Alice gripping Richie's hand tightly as her small face contorted with fear at the sight of the agents. I had put in a fresh magazine after we got in the house. Aiming through the sights, I began to fire, my ears ringing as fire erupted from the barrel. Blood erupted from the chests and faces of the agents, their tentacles splitting apart and spewing black fluid on the pavement below. Their high-pitched, animalistic shrieks echoed off the pavement as they ran forwards in a blur. I remember seeing 2 of them fall, then 4, then another couple stumbled as the gun clicked beneath my finger. I had gone through all 30 rounds, and it wasn't enough. 3 of them still ran at us when a blinding light flashed above the trees. I heard a thwack 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 sound and a powerful engine roaring behind it. I looked up just in time to see a Black Hawk helicopter flying overhead. A man with a machine gun began firing, mowing down all the remaining agents in a matter of moments. He turned the gun towards those crawling on the ground, still alive, and with a flash of bullets, they stopped moving as well. Then he slowly began to turn the gun on us. I had started to reload, slamming the magazine in as fast as I could. Without thinking, I raised it, looked through the sights, and fired. As if in slow motion, I saw the man above me in the helicopter jerk before falling out the side door. With a heavy thud, his body hit the lawn of Richie's house far below. The helicopter kept flying and soon disappeared over the forest, the sound of its blades receding and then disappearing within seconds. I turned to Richie, seeing his sweaty face and wide, bloodshot eyes. The agent stood behind him, his face covered in blood. Richie still held Alice's hand, and the girl had her face pressed against his chest, silently crying. "We really need to get out of here," I said, looking hard at the agent. I wondered how much he knew, and how much he would tell me. Our bedraggled group, bloody and sore and injured, began walking as one towards the trail down the street, one that I knew ran through a nature reserve and came out at the next town over. And as I listened to the agent talk, I realized just how wrong I had been about everything happening in my town. Hey friends! Are you brave enough to face the darkness? Join our ever-growing community of thrill seekers by hitting that subscribe button now.